Hi, boys and girls. Welcome back to part two of Who is Ben Carson? When we last met, we talked about Dr. Carson's success as a brain surgeon and how he attributes that to the sacrifice and love of his mom, who raised him and his brother all by herself. And so he knows that he and his family were blessed. So he often shares and tells young people to think big and dream about their futures, use the gifts, talents, and abilities that God has blessed them with. And so he has this in his home to remind him by humility and the fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life. Remember in part one when I said that his mom used to dream about the future when he and his brother would have beautiful homes of their own? And now they see those dreams come true after all her sacrifice for them. And God has blessed their family with the three grown sons and their families of their own. And oftentimes, one of his sons would have people meet him and they would say, "You're Ben Carson's son?" And he'd say, "Well, some people call him hero and doctor. I just call him dad." And so he and his wife have gone on to do many charitable works, including Carson's Scholars Fund. And they do lots of reading projects and reading rooms in libraries all across America. And this is Candyland Reading Room in Florida. Candyland, like his wife named Candy. Here are some other beautiful reading rooms across the country. And a few years ago, one of our previous presidents honored him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This is the highest honor any American can receive, even though they're not in the military. And so, as he's traveling all across the country, people are getting to know him more and more. He's often being encouraged to run for president. And so he went for it in the year 2016. And as he's traveling all over the country running for president, people are getting to know him and his family better. They're finding out things about his life, including what music does for their family. And he would always say, I only did music in high school. And he played clarinet, trumpet, euphonium, and baritone. But the real musician is Mrs. Carson, and she wrote a book about their life. And oftentimes he would come home after a long, hard day because oftentimes their sons would ask, "Where's dad? Why isn't he home yet?" And she'd say, "Well, he's out there saving people's lives." And so when he'd come home exhausted after operating, he'd like to listen to her play. So I'm going to play a little musical clip of her talents.
To fly a rocket ship, you need to be an optimist. No astronaut launches for space.
And I'm on the piano usually, just doing praise songs. And after dinner, that's what I do. And sometimes, Ben will fall asleep listening to the music. I said, well, because I'll say, well, have you heard all the ones you want to hear? So, well, did you play this one? I said, well, yeah, a while ago. And he said, oh, yeah, well, can you play it again? One, break. Okay, yeah. So hold it for one full and break it off on two. Said the little lamb to the shepherd boy, no more I know the child.
Will you please help me welcome Mrs. Candy? Carson and the Carson America Singers.
We're all connected with the campaign in one way or another, and that's why we're called Carson America Singers.
I am on the finance team as well. I'm in administrative work.
Cool. America, may God thy glory I figured it'd be nice to introduce them on this album, so that's why I arranged Do You Hear What I Hear? And I think it came out pretty well. Do you see what I see? See what I see? My mom was our organist, so she required that all of us play keyboard and one other instrument. And I was 10, and I'd already started violin. I'd been on piano for a little bit. She said, well, if I get you a flute, will you play it? And you think I'm going to say no? I can get out of chores? Hey, this is cool, you know? And I played in the symphony, the Yale Symphony. I was pre-med, but I was music and psych. And Ben's an upperclassman, and I was an incoming freshman. As we're driving.
So here's another funny video clip here of them in music.
One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right.
So who do you think played better? So obviously he didn't make it as president of the United States, but President Trump appointed him to be the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And of course, at first people thought, why would you want to get him to serve in this position? And then he would often say, but who would know better how to help the poor people struggling in the cities all across our country? Since he grew up as a poor boy in a poor family in one of the poor areas of our country. So he understands better than other people. And during this time, God is using him to help our country during this crisis of the coronavirus. And so he is encouraging people to draw close to God, to pray and look to God in faith during this time of need, and that we don't need to think about what makes us all different from each other, but what can unite and bring us together. And so he's often told us that in our country about how we can succeed and do well if we do our part to work hard and study. And so I'm going to play a special clip here for you that he gave at a Christian university.
And when you think about it, you think about the brain that God has given you. We were made in his image, and he's no dummy. You know, your brain has billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections. It can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. It doesn't forget anything you've ever seen or anything you've ever heard, which is why it's important to make sure you don't put the wrong things in there, because they always will impact upon you subconsciously and consciously. But to give you some idea of how complex your brain is, how many of you remember your birthday? Let me just see your hand. I think it's unanimous. Now, what did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question almost instantly? Well, first of all, sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory meatus, travel down to the tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, which travel across the oscles of the middle ear to the oval and round window, set up a vibratory force in the endolymph, mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which travel across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction. From there to the superior olivary nucleus, ascending bilaterally up the brainstem to the lateral meniscus, to the inferior colliculus and the medial geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiation to the posterior temporal lobes to begin the auditory processing, but to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract of Victor Jury, retrieving the memory from the medial hippocampal structure to the mammary bodies, back to the frontal lobes to start the motor response at the bet cell level, coming down the cortical spinal tract, across the terminal capsule into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervicomedullary decussation, so you can raise your hand. Now, that's a simplified version. Now, see how many rap singers can do that. But you know, if your brain can do all that, you barely even have to think about it. What is your brain capable of if you actually put your mind to something? It really is quite daunting when you stop to think about it. And you know, our nation right now is in a bit of trouble intellectually because people don't think. People are not knowledgeable. The founders of our nation said that our system of government could only succeed with a well-educated populace. And they said once the populace...
So now you see how and why I think he's such a special person. So see you next time.